Great. Hi, everybody.
Questions on Slack.
Perfect. You know, right after break, best slot ever, right? Just like my right after lunch. Okay, so really quickly, this actually was really meant to be a discussion, not a presentation, because NASA, yeah, roundtable, right? So because NASA is just in general really trying to get into the whole VR, 360 video, immersive space. And, you know, as part of the Museum Alliance, part of my job is to speak up and say, hey, planetariums are really good at doing that, period. Right? They've been doing it for a long, long time. And so that's just part of my job. So Museum Alliance is kind of the nexus where not only can museums access NASA, NASA can access museums-ish. That's like a two-way street. And so on the Museum Alliance page, this is actually one of our rare publicly facing resources. So you should all be able to find it if you just look for NASA, Museum Alliance VR, I don't know, whatever you want to search for. But it looks like this. And I have just rudimentarily collected and aggregated all of NASA's 360 that I can find, that I've been able to get my hands on from across NASA, from Kennedy, Johnson, Marshall, from JPL, Apollo 11, that Apollo 11 panorama that Lars wanted, it's right there. Here it is. It's in the zip file, but anyway. So this is kind of just, again, just an aggregate, simple aggregate of everything. And part of why I'm here is because NASA's Universe of Learning wants to create an actual, not just an aggregate, not just a list of bullet points, we want to create an actual space that can help content creators, that can help educators, that can help users of VR stuff, not just use VR, not just present VR, but really educate with it and really inspire some learning and inspire something meaningful in students. Because we've all done shows where it's just people, you know, walk in and they walk out, or they walk by whatever we've done. And then my goal, again, is that one kid in that planetarium who's actually engaged, who's actually inspired, who actually wants to learn something out of this visualization, out of these experiences. So again, I wanted this to be a discussion, so any questions so far about anything like this? And if you are on the website, if you are on the webpage, do you see anything that you could use in here? I have like tips for planetarium people. If you, I have a digital sky system and a UniView system, so I have tips for that. But of course, Kevin Scott and I were talking about how to get a Digistar, how to do in there. And I think that in a planetarium specifically, where it's not just a single person with goggles, but a whole classroom of kids who can sit and literally point to something interesting and share that experience in a social environment. I think it was Jackie who was saying that you know, VR goggles are great, but in a planetarium it's better. Right, in that space where you can talk with each other in a real-time way and just experience it together is so powerful. It's so powerful. I mean, that's all I wanted to say, really. I mean, any you didn't have to clap for that. But for example, does anyone have any questions about anything that's on here? If you're on the site, just scrolling through, or if you're just looking on here, is there anything that pops out to you that says like, hey, I could use this for some actual learning? Yeah? I'm wondering if that's Digital Sky Dark Matter or Digital Sky 2? Digital Sky 2, yeah. I haven't upgraded yet. But I hear Digital Dark Matter is super easy.
I prefer the DS.
Okay, well there you go then. I have sample buttons in there somewhere that you can just download. Okay, no, that's fine. If I'm ending early, that's fine too. Yeah.
What's the VR world doing in general in terms of sharing your resources? Is there a YouTube for VR?
Is there a YouTube for VR?
Outside of our astronomy community?
I'm assuming you mean something other than shoot. this here, other than this, right, of the YouTube 360, because all of the NASA 360 videos, they've just put it up to YouTube 360. In fact, JPL treats it as social media. They treat 360 videos not as a visualization, they treat it as social media. So that's kind of how the direction that they've taken. Kennedy and Johnson and Marshall, they're all doing separate things, but they all have assets on this page that I've just happened to say, hey, can I have it? And they send it over. And it's just all in one space for people to get as a convenience, really. Yeah.
I have a question for the VR people. I haven't done VR myself, but I'm working with teachers and animators in VR to create work opportunities for students at the planetarium. How closely are they related? Is the stuff in VR translate directly to planetarium and vice versa? Or is planetarium more of a niche of VR?
I can start that really quickly. And Ryan, go ahead if you want to.
So yes, I think this is actually, we have a whole session at IPS, the International Planetarium Society, that's coming out on this topic. So basically, so actually, first of all, terminology, VR for purists, VR virtual reality really refers to an interactive environment that is real time and in which the person experiencing it has agency. Planetarium shows maybe use real-time software, but it's basically 360 or it's 180 video, and then 360 video, like YouTube 360, is kind of what we're talking about here as well. In terms of taking a 360 video and dropping in a planetarium, technically it totally works, and you can even in certain software packages interactively move your camera around so you're looking at different parts of the image. The difference is that, from my perspective, a well-designed planetarium show takes you on a journey and you're moving through the space that a well-designed 360 video doesn't typically do, or at least doesn't move you very quickly, because the idea is to give you agency to look around the entire environment. So I think it's an interesting topic to think about how these kind of support one another, but they are really different media. We actually took our entire show incoming and made a 360 video so you could like go through the head trip, headache experience of watching a 25-minute VR stereoscopic experience where you have no agency, you're forced to fly along with the camera, but it's not very pleasant. We shortened it into 3-minute clips, which are a little easier, but they're sort of, on the flip side, not really well-designed VRs or 360 videos.
Yeah, and I just want to say one last thing of the one thing that I'm really working on in the next, seriously, the next 6 to 12 months is taking these disparate VR experiences that NASA has created and creating a curriculum that gives agency, that is interactive, that is learning objectives heavy, I suppose, and that's kind of what I've been working on. So if you're interested in that, let me know. Thanks, guys.
Nice.
Oh, PDF.
Yeah.
Let's see.
Is there a full screen?
Yes. Or will it full screen and replace? That's not on this display, is it? Okay.
Great. Hi, everyone. Oh, sorry.
That's right. Introduce yourself.
Brianna with this planetarium. I just wanted to spend a few minutes thinking about how can we maybe use planetariums more interactively. And I know that there are some techniques out there already, but I wanted to just share one other technique that we've been experimenting with lately. So, you know, traditionally planetariums, there are all these amazing, awesome visuals thanks to a lot of people here. And there's a lot of power in using storytelling to teach some of these topics. But I guess all of these are sort of a passive mode of learning. And so especially for using planetariums in educational purposes, like formal education, how can we use these spaces to teach more actively? And so we're kind of testing out some of these new learner-centered labs. This is kind of based on a case study model of learning used historically by law and medicine and business. For example, you have a patient who is exhibiting these symptoms, what's wrong with that person, right? And then teams of people can go try to figure out what questions do we need to ask in order to answer this question. So basically, we had students work in small groups, and they are the ones driving what are the observations that you want to make in the planetarium. What questions do you want to ask? What questions will lead to other questions that you want to ask? And then we just have the instructor and some facilitators to help these groups along. And we started with just kind of one of the more basic topics in astronomy. This is something that just about any planetarium could do, and that is, suppose you were dropped on a random location on the Earth. You have 24 hours to observe the sky. Can you figure out your latitude, your longitude, and roughly what time of year it is? And that ended up being really fun. Students, they come in with the prerequisite knowledge of, sky, stars rise in the east, set in the west. Polaris, here's how you find it. And you can use your hand measurements to figure out rough approximate angles. So here's just, some of these students kind of interacting. And then we've tried this for both a larger class setting and a smaller lab type setting where we have smaller groups. Working on whiteboards and really planning out, what observations you're going to have to make, things like that. So the students really seem to get a lot out of this. They anecdotally, just by way of seeing them interact, they seem a lot more engaged. They've given us a lot of positive feedback and really would like to see more of these. We tried a second one where it's more of a discovering your place in the galaxy. So getting back to the question of how do scientists go about their science? How do they know the things they know? How could we figure out where we are located in the galaxy? And here we drop them in at a random planet in the galaxy, and they have to try to figure out, okay, what's the shape of the galaxy? Is it, are you more in a spiral or an elliptical galaxy? What observations support that? And also, where roughly are you located? Are you closer to the center, at the very edge, somewhere in between? And initially students think about, well, what if we just count stars in all directions? And then they run into the same problem that Herschel did, and they think that we're the center of the galaxy. But then they might use their prior knowledge of, well, what if we look at different wavelengths of light, right? And then use infrared data sets that we have to learn that they're in fact partially out between the center and the edge of the galaxy. And we had, students making them feel like this is much more realistic in terms of what science does, how science proceeds. So I guess this is more just like a question, how can we maybe extend this to other audiences? Maybe K-12, but also general public. Is there a way that we can make general public shows that are explicitly marketed for, you're gonna be the scientist, you're gonna figure out how this works. So yeah, are there ways that we can create and use visualizations to engage learners in other ways, more active ways or non-standard ways? Thanks.
So yes, yeah, I was just building off this question. Do you do any programming geared towards any underserved or underrepresented groups, or using visualization, say girls in STEM or other underrepresented groups?
Yeah, not so much currently, although we are actively also looking into sound sonification for the blind, and actually John Keller is going to be talking about that next.
Yeah,
But that would be something to pursue for sure. Yeah.
Thanks.
I'm wondering if there's any games out there. Gamification would be some kind of learning tools. The new way of learning is a lot more interactive. So I just don't know if I'm not familiar with this. I just open up questions to the audience. Is there any games out there for any science, not necessarily just astro?
Yeah, and I'd be curious about that too, just because in at least 2D, in the 2D world, gamification is a nice way of leading to interactivity. I think the challenge with the planetarium space is that you have this captive audience, and yes, you can have a little bit of back and forth as the audience asks a question. Oh, can we see Saturn? And then yes, the person flying the system can go take you there, but it's not the same as you actually interacting.
Right.
Whereas this, we were really trying to give the students more of this feel of you are the ones in charge.
Right.
So yeah, I'm curious if there are any ideas of how to gamify planetarium space.
Especially when, there's, it's really, a lot of people now actually going to like a theater and doing gaming at the same time and doing competitions. And, there's a lot of money and a lot of interest in that. So does anybody have any?
I mean, one avenue that we've sort of thought about is how do you bring, that's where maybe AR comes into play. How can you sort of, you come into a planetarium space and maybe you can use AR to augment that, and that way you have this kind of individualized experience in addition to the communal one.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So Travis was expecting the Planetarium Roundtable to be a roundtable. So
I expected a roundtable.
So we're going to do that, but we're gonna bring his sort of question and save that for the end. And so Matt, where are you, Matt? There you are. You can come up. Is that open?
Yep, let's go to the top.
You want to start at the first slide?
Yeah, probably start with the first.
All right, so Matt Russo from University of Toronto.
All right, thanks. Hi, everyone. So I'm going to tell you about a little show I did in Toronto that I was hoping to let people experience the universe through new eyes and through new ears. So here's Robin Rennie. She's a professional visual artist, and she was always in love with the night sky until, well, she still is, but in 2005, she had an acute illness that robbed her of most of her vision and of her relationship with the stars. And so 13 years later, in last fall, her daughter contacted the University of Toronto. I work at the Planetarium there and said, is there anything you can do to maybe enhance the show a little, to make it more accessible to her? And I was getting really into sonification at the time, so I said, I'll just collect all the sounds of the universe I can think of, put them in a show, and take them on an audio tour of the universe. And so that became our musical universe, a sound-based planetarium show exploring the rhythm and the harmony of the cosmos. So there are visuals, right? I've enhanced the visuals as much as I can. I basically just jacked up all the brightnesses and the line thicknesses, but not to extreme amounts. No one else has noticed. No one that's not visually impaired has noticed the changes I made, but it's more accessible to them. You have to change how you narrate, of course. It has to be more spatial narration, things that are obvious when you see them. You have to tell people where you're going, what you're doing, how it's happening. And so Robin was so moved by the show that when she went home, she painted that painting of what she heard and felt at the show. And then I defaced it and put Jupiter in front for the poster. But she gave me the painting, and I just cherish it. So I'm going to give you a little sample. This isn't the actual footage. I'll tell you about that later. It's animations I've made and some that I just ripped off of YouTube last night. But can everyone just close their eyes? And imagine you are, say, in Toronto, or at least in a big open field, and the sun is setting off to your right. And as the sun sets, the stars would appear. You're also going to be able to hear the stars. So the brighter notes you hear are the brighter stars, and the higher pitched notes are the hotter, bluer stars. If you're not cheating, you can open your eyes. There's animations to go with this. And of course, the constellations are made up of different types of stars, so each constellation produces its own unique melody. And you can communicate the colors and temperatures of stars even more precisely through sound than you could just by looking at it with your eye. It has all kinds of different sonifications. These are lightning strikes, creating Whistler waves as they travel along the Earth's magnetosphere, basically like giant guitar strings in space, sort of sound like lasers. We also listen to the rhythms of Jupiter's moons, famously discovered by Galileo. It's a pretty cool drum beat. We listen to a scale played in Saturn's rings by the moons Janus and Epimetheus. There's actually resonant rings, and if you collect them all, they play a scale right across. Also use some catalogs. This is a sonification of exoplanet discoveries. Every note's a planet through time. The pitch is the color and temperature of the host star. And this is, every note here is a galaxy as you fly away from your home, the Milky Way. Again, the pitch is the color and temperature. And so I take people all the way to the edge. And of course, we listen to the sound of the universe itself in the form of the cosmic microwave background radiation as it was emitted. Kind of sounds like a giant trombone that just gets longer and longer and longer. And so for a very small planetarium show, a local show in a small planetarium dome, it got quite a bit of press. U of T's article on it. Got national coverage in Canada, the Globe and Mail, National Post, and even a bit of TV. And you guys probably have this problem where it's really hard to get a good picture of yourself inside the dark planetarium. So they threw me in the lab next door and I pretended that I knew what those things were. Maybe an oscilloscope? I don't know. So this got a lot of press and we got a lot of people in there. We sold out every single show. So that's about 40 so far in the last couple of months. So that's about 1,000 people. It's a very small dome. But the most rewarding things were inviting groups of visually impaired people from the Canadian National Institute for the Blind and from the Canadian Council of the Blind. And we just have a great time. They're much more responsive than the average person in this musical tour. And I think they're getting a lot more out of it. Sometimes they cry a little, sometimes I cry a little. It's a great time. And I've made a lot of new friends this way. And a cool thing they told me is a lot of them have had sight in the past and they lost their vision. And so in that case, it's kind of like a filing cabinet. They have images in a filing cabinet from their past. And so my job is to help them kind of retrieve them and put them together in their imagination through this complete tour of the universe. And so I'm going to finish with this. So the reason I don't have footage is because we haven't fully rendered it yet. And what we want to do is get a fully rendered version that we could ship out to other planetariums. And I have no idea how to do that. So I'd be interested in talking to all of you. Many of you know how to do that and how that works. And yeah, thank you very much.
All right, so one question is, how did you sequence the star sounds for the constellations?
Yeah.
Was it algorithmic or was it hand designed?
There's a few ways to do that. So I've got a mapping. So in that case, it sounded pretty okay, right? So I picked a scale. So then I'm picking the notes in that case. But which note is chosen is determined by the color and brightness of the star. And its brightness determines the volume. Its color determines the pitch. And then in that case, I was picking random stars. You can also pick them based on their positions. You can make them kind of spiral around in RA or up to the zenith or whatever you want. And then the constellations I all played from low to high because it was the easiest way to communicate the range of star types in a constellation.
Want to ask your own question?
So how long is the show in total and how much of it is rendered?
It's about 50 minutes. And so it's all happening live in the dome right now. But I have rendered versions that I've done. Like things I showed you there are animations I've made that are very similar to what's in UniView, which is what I'm using. And so I'm not sure. I want the final product to be a combination of content I produce in JavaScript on my own and UniView, and to make it seamless, so it's not like scene, to be able to fly through. So that's the plan. Yeah.
So how many notes where we're playing at any given time? So if you're looking at something like 50,000 stars,
yeah,
then why doesn't this play 50,000 notes?
Yeah, that's algorithmic. So in that case, for that one you heard, I was picking 6 stars every second, random 6 stars every second. Some are much, much dimmer than others, so it's quiet and loud and quiet and loud. But that could be anything. That's just my first choice.
Which software do you use? And also, I would like to make a comment. It would be nice if people who present visualization tell us a little bit of how they make the technical part, because I think many of us just Like happiness, like putting things together.
Yeah, so am I. So the animation you saw of the stars blinking was my first trial in Python. It's really embarrassing how I did it. I don't want to tell you because it took me a million years. I'm rendering every single frame. The other ones you saw there, I've moved on to JavaScript. So I'm using 3.js to do my more modern version of the night sky and of Jupiter and of Sat. The Saturn one was a hodgepodge of things in Final Cut Pro. And so it's all over the place because I wasn't into visualization until about a year ago. So I'm figuring it out as I go.
So do one more? We'll do one more.
What was the live one? John?
I didn't technical one.
All right, you can ask him later. So astrovisualizations have some sort of visual vocabulary. Have you thought about a sort of audio vocabulary for your sonifications?
In terms of communicating among other people that do it?
Clarify.
Yes.
Oh, sorry.
So like you see a solar system line, we know what that means. You don't have to tell people that. When you interpret that for us, like, oh, you're hearing, you have to say these are the 6 brightest stars, so you have to like take time out of the show to do that, or can you create a narrative, a vocabulary where these things mean this and these things mean that, and then you can introduce that at the beginning and then use that to the show?
I haven't really found a need for that. I found ways to communicate what the mappings are as they're happening. Just finding really relatable examples and analogies. So I didn't want to burden them with extra terminology they have to know, they haven't come in with.
So you just
I spent a lot of time thinking about exactly which words to say so that it matched the visuals and it was very intuitive. Yeah.
Keller, Astroviz, Sound Planetarium.
John Keller? More sonification?
More sonification. Thanks so much. So again, I arrived at this planetarium 6 months ago. I am actually mostly giving a pitch for some work that Tara Knight and Adam Burgasser from UCSD and CU Boulder are currently working on. And we'll talk a little bit about sonification of a project they're doing called Sound Planetarium. This is so I'm actually presenting their work because we're relating to work that we're doing with this, but they're looking for partners essentially. So they were excited about having folks hear about the work that they're doing. Some background information for that. That's interesting. Is actually I just wanted to throw in a little pitch for citizen science before talking about Sound Planetarium work. I run a network of 55 high schools stretching from Utah, stretching from Arizona all the way up to the Pacific Northwest that are doing TNO occultation work of measuring hyperbole objects using occultation measurements. Working with Mark Bowie, who is part of the MU69 campaign. I'll be in Senegal in a couple of weeks observing that event. But this is a citizen science project of teachers helping us study hyperbole objects. And just putting out a pitch for Planetarium in general, Planetarium are a great space to involve students and teachers. And so what I will be working on in the future is how do we engage teachers in Planetarium work? How do we provide classes for pre-service teachers so that they learn how to run Planetaria so that they can actually be an integral part of the Planetarium experience? And so that is work I'll be doing in the future. Sound Planetarium-wise, when I was in graduate school, it's going much faster than I want to. In graduate school about 20 years ago, while doing Mars gamma ray spectroscopy work with Michelle, actually, back in the day, we did create a sonification of Mars data. We used a composer in Marty Quinn in New Hampshire, created a sonification that involved the amount of sunlight that was being received at different latitudes on Mars. Sonified that as a drum pitch that got louder and softer with sunlight. And then also coded the amount of hydrogen signal that we were getting from the gamma ray spectrometer and neutron signal we were getting from the neutron spectrometer. And this really wants to go fast forward quickly. So we were able to then show correlations between decreasing neutrons, which was decreasing carbon dioxide, and increasing hydrogen signal, which was increasing the permanent water ice caps. And we used this back in that time frame to actually test with college students. If we let them just hear the data, how did the learning compare with what they saw the data compared to a group of students, an entire class of students who saw and heard the data? And we actually found in that very preliminary test that people had to do both at the same time. And this comes back to your question over there, when you had to process both the sound and the visual together, there's a lot of cognitive load of trying to figure out what you're hearing and seeing at the same time. Whereas the folks who just heard it were able to practice, but they could figure out what their palette was, how they were reading their sonification graph in order to make that learning happen. The sound planetarium work that Tara and Adam are working on, this is an instrument that is being created in virtual reality. They're using VR as their platform for test bedding and developing the sound planetarium model. So you can actually have a personal experience with the universe, or it can be translated to the dome environment, like what Matt has done. And so their work is, again, same idea, taking sonification, orchestrating various pieces of data. They're creating a tool that they would like the user to be able to change their sonification, so giving the user the interactivity. If I want to change these pitches, those tones, and make the sonification as they would like to be used in the virtual space. And so we're going to try, I'm going to give you a quick demo of the work that they have started to do. And they're also working a lot on directionality. So they want to put up, like within the VR world and with just simple headsets, you can actually get directionality of where the sound is coming from. So you can hear east, west, north, south, up, down, zenith. Obviously, not every planetarium has the right ability and the right sound system to do directional related sonification work, but that's one of their goals as well, is to take this into the planetarium world. How can you have directionality where you can actually hear the star as it moves across the sky, not just the pitch and the sonification pieces. And so this is a part of their work of where they're currently going with this. This is a technical demo that they put together back in February. It is best using an auditory headset. 4 minutes, that's awesome, that's great, so much time. And so we'll just play 1 minute of this, 4 minutes. You'll hear different stars coming above the horizon. They've sonified spectral type, brightness, color, temperature, those kinds of features and mappings. As stars go around the other side, you'll still disappear off the horizon. And then coming to your point, how are they doing this? They're using a VR space where they have actually mapped out stars, the top 100 stars or top 20 stars in this case, onto a sphere. They just map them onto a sphere, and they're virtually rotating that sphere around with the horizon that they've created to then decide when the pitches are going to come on and off. How they've actually sonified it depends upon, I mean, you can use any number of palettes as we explore all the time in the sonification world. So let's stop that. And what I'll just finish with is that I know back in 2003, there was an international conference, International Committee on Auditory Displays. It was actually a group of roughly this group times 2 of not just, not visualizers, but actually auditoryalizers. I'm interested because I actually need to reconnect Tara and those folks and anybody interested in sonification. Like, what is that sonification community doing? Where are they meeting? How do we as a group go forward with the astronomy sonification world to make that message get shared? Tara and Adam would love to connect with any of you as they continue to do their work and progress moving forward. So I'll stop there. Yeah, sure.
Could you talk more about the directionality and how that's going?
Yeah, so back in the 2000s, there were all these crazy big instruments where you would have speakers from all different directions, so you get the pitch directionality. Tara and Adam have just been using regular earbud headphones, and there's enough modulation that they've been able to get that you can actually get some semblance of the directionality. They're also using VR headphones to getting a better perception of that.
And they're coding this all up in some sort of VR language?
Yep, okay, exactly. They also, in a planetarium environment, you just need lots and lots of speakers, both in front and the back and around you, so that you can measure.
I'll toss out a quick observation. The orbit pavilion actually does this kind of dimensional sonification for satellite tracks, so for anyone going for that. And do sign up for that today if you're interested. It's on the sheets out on there. Sorry.
And I think
So how many speakers would it take to actually do this if you were recommending Planetarium? Or?
Yeah, I actually don't know, but more than 2. I mean, it's just going to be the directionality. You definitely need front speakers and back speakers if you're really going to get that type of directionality. What I wanted to add as well is like the learning about what you're hearing is like we've all learned how to read graphs, right? And we're very used to reading graphs. Learning how to listen to sound is a skill that a talent that takes. But for people with visual impairments, like if that's your only access to that data, that's a really important point of success for teachers to get.
Okay. Thank you very much. And now Doug Roberts is going to tell us about how to expand the reuse of worldwide telescope.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, so as most of you know, I had a relationship with Worldwide Telescope as a kind of a project manager and more on the creation side of things. But this, what I'm talking about today, is really about as a user, a consumer, and how Worldwide Telescope's used, and also how it can be reused. Obviously, one of the things that's a theme of this conference is we're all spending a lot of time and energy making the cool stuff that we do, and when we can, we really love people to take that investment and leverage it and reuse it in other ways, and also to grow the community. One of the things I would say, from the people who've been around AstroViz for a long time, it's great to see a lot of young people in the audience, because at some point it was great when we all met, years and years ago, and we were the young people, but now we need to feed that machine, and it's great to see that happening. So Worldwide Telescope can be used in various ways on the kind of the education side of things. It can be used in labs and courses, in formal education. It can be used in community outreach, or making planetarium shows is a prime example for informal or specific projects. So for instance, there are ways where the glimpse survey and so forth had been presented in Worldwide Telescope as a way to get the data out. And then on the scholarly side of research, there's a lot of interest in using Worldwide Telescope as a data visualization tool to help scientists understand their data, create collaborations, leveraging the social aspects of planetarium domes, and making that be a place where that can happen, as well as scholarly publishing using Worldwide Telescope in its web client capacity that I think Jonathan will talk more about tomorrow in that vein. Just some examples of where it's being used. Worldwide Telescope has a kiosk mode, so if you can create a tour, you can install it on a kiosk in a secure manner. And the cool thing about it, it actually can combine together a narrative, story-driven approach that can be coordinated with audio, along with a free exploration. So you may give people, tell them about the solar system, leave them in the place, and have them explore on their own, and then continue the story and kind of interleave that, which is a powerful way to create an interactive experience, but not just have it sitting out there, but have it contextualized with the narrative. And again, it's relatively inexpensive to do because it just requires basically a monitor and a PC. The PC ages ago needed to be a pretty high power PC, but nowadays kind of contemporary integrated graphics work well, and of course discrete graphics work great. I guess I just heard that Intel's making a new discrete graphics card coming out, so this will be probably more and more prevalent. One of the great things about Worldwide Telescope is just as a data visualizer of large images. Jonathan mentioned this, the way that Worldwide Telescope presents data in this toast format allows for multi-resolution zooming and panning in a very smooth manner that's very, very powerful. And in this wall at the Adler, primarily it was used to look, or in this case, this is an image where you're just perusing a high-resolution image, and to be able to do that smoothly and naturally is incredibly powerful. And then in the same case, the planetarium can be used, or it can be used in two different kinds of scales of planetarium. One is in the largest scales, domes like the Adler on many PCs driving together, coordinated together, as well as on the smallest scales with domes you can build with cardboard and paper clips. And so at a really low, with a mirror dome with a security mirror with a cheap projector. At something you can put together for $1,000 or $1,000 or so. So these are the ways we can use Worldwide Telescope, and so I was just trying to so I think we all kind of know. I think most people around here know that all these capabilities are out there, but there are opportunities and challenges going forward. So some on the opportunity side, Worldwide Telescope is free, which is great. And again, it does have this ability to do story-driven and free exploration, which is unique. It's a powerful real-time system that gives people not like a stripped-down version, but a really fully fledged visualization system. For those of in the audience who do full dome rendering for other shows, Worldwide Telescope can render star fields or frames you can composite things on top of, or you can render out the full show if that's what you wanted. It has a really great user guided interaction. So there's several domes I know that give a game controller to the guests in the audience, and they play around and explore as a proxy for the audience, and that makes a very interesting user-driven way to experience the dome. You can create stories with workshops where you have young people create, in a couple hours they can learn how to and create a little tour that represents their understanding of something, and then they can do that on a laptop and then take it into the dome and see it on the big screen. It has built-in sharing so that you can publish your tour in a way that somebody else can retrieve. And the same content can be experienced in flat, dome, web, and VR, although there's been several conversations, and one of the things to be aware of is that when you have a full 360 to fill, you want to take advantage of that in a way that when you're constrained by the box of a HDTV, you can't, and you'll really want to compose it differently, but technically it can do all that. But there are some challenges. One is basically there's not a support group for a learning community, a users group in Worldwide Telescope in the way there are for the Planetarium, the vendor Planetarium groups like Digistar User Group and things like that, where the vendor supports the user community and getting together and training each other. There are opportunities for workshops. There'll be one at the IPS in Toulouse in a couple weeks, but those are kind of ad hoc, and there's not really supported by a clear person you can go to. And Worldwide Telescope can kind of do so much, and a lot of people are excited to see the more advanced things, that it's not clear how to get from the introductory level up to the complex level. And one of the problems I think that is clear here, that is one of the things that makes me so appreciative of places or people and places like Lars and ESO, and the people that actually curate and actually make their data available. That's a huge effort, and I don't know what it takes, but it probably the overhead to actually distribute it is probably almost as much to produce it, I assume, at some point. No, okay, maybe you got the infrastructure down so it's easy, but I know when I create something and I'm thinking, I'm going to break these little pieces out and put them out in open source for the community. That never happens because I never have time. I think we should wrap this up and just I put these out here just as a way to may start a conversation about how to overcome some of the challenges to get to the opportunities. So thanks.
I don't see anything on Slack, but
okay.
There's one quick question while we are swapping over.
Otherwise, I went along so I can. Okay, there's one card.
Have you thought of doing tutorial videos?
There are tutorial videos. I think that's one of the things that needs to have more of it. Obviously, some things like if you wanted to know something in Creative Suite, you just go online and Google, Premiere, Composite, blah blah blah, and there's 20 videos somebody's made. And Worldwide Telescope doesn't have that depth of user community, so you just can't do a kind of a Google search to find them. And so I think it does require at this stage a little bit of concerted effort to make a complete set of videos. Right now they're kind of sporadic and are not as complete, but that's a great way to create a community, because you can find the person who made the video, get in contact with them. It's a way to find the relationships, because right now, if you were to start, again, where do you start, who do you talk to, it's kind of unclear, but I think videos are a great way to do that. Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Lars again.
Hey there. I'm not sure why I'm giving this presentation, but I'll try to make it a bit interesting, at least to the planetarians in the room, because it's not so astrovis oriented. But anyway, we built this planetarium I'll tell a story about it. So we got a donation from something called the Klaus Tschira Foundation in around 2013, a substantial donation. They don't want the price mentioned, but it's dozens of millions of euros. And we've been working together with them over the past 5 years with this as our sort of guiding principle, this architect's rendering you all know very well. And then suddenly on the 24th of April, you wake up one day and it's open. And it's that's really psychedelic because you have this thing in your mind and you're planning and planning and planning. So the construction took about 2 years, and there was a lot of concrete pouring and hammering and, you know, the drill. So this was taken from 2 angles. That's why it flips back and forth with a chronological time going through. You can see they made those concrete elements, some 900 concrete elements in situ. And the architects, they couldn't draw things like this on paper or in a computer. They had to do parametric modeling in order to make it work. So when they changed a piece of the facade, everything else changed in the building. And this was the only way to do something so complicated. And why is it so complicated? Because the donor, Klaus Tschira himself, who sadly passed away in 2015 without seeing his big work, he wanted, firstly, he wanted a nebula, and the architects, they pondered on that for a while. And they had to give up. So it became then a supernova, or just before 2 stars are coalescing, they're exchanging material. You have this kind of very dramatic surface where you can see it's torn apart in 2 spheres. One of them is the planetarium, the other one is a temporary exhibition space. So this is sort of views from the 24th of April, just about 6-7 weeks ago, when people started coming through the exhibition and seeing the final place. And we've so far only seen smiles, but of course we're also in the honeymoon phase right now. No, I'm behind the scenes, except right now. It's free, so that was why I had this in here, which is weird, right? But it's a donation, so the first year it's free for everyone to come in and see the place and take part in the activities. We have planetarium shows and many other things. This was the first day of we invited the local community. We hadn't quite realized, which is so blindingly obvious. We're 3 kilometers from the center of the town, 18,000 people. They're all coming on bikes, of course. So there was this massive, like, they were everywhere in the fire lane, and we were like, okay, scrambling. This is the key handover, the moment with the real-time Digistar running in the background, courtesy of Kevin, who came a week before to kind of like shake us up and do all sorts of things to get things ready. It was a very interesting period that I will never forget. This is the foyer. So you can imagine these 2 spheres, and then we have exhibition area on ramps. Can you believe it? Exhibitions on ramps. It's like, okay. But anyway, very interesting architecture. We do lots of different things, of course, the planetarium shows, but also the school visits are very, very deeply embedded in the structure. They come in, they have workshops, tours, and a planetarium show. But we also do public events and many other things, teacher trainings. This is our current complement of shows that we have. We're running 8 different shows with the 9th show here coming. That's the Sun Show. These are the events that we've had. Very exciting. We've had some musical events. Very cool. Someone playing live in the dome and then running visuals. Louis can tell you lots of stories about this. These are the exhibition tours and premises tour around ESO. We have even an architect tour where people look at the architecture because it's really quite something special. We have 2 different exhibits or exhibitions. One is the permanent one is about Hubble and art, and these are our workshops for the kids. So quite a complement of activities. For those who want to know about our planetarium, we have 5 velvet projectors with about 4K resolution. Our main software is Kevin's Digistar 6. But recently also, Evans and Sutherland did some amazing work on streaming. Without going into too much detail, we have UHD streaming. So we can take any source, football, World Championship, anyone? PowerPoint presentations, or Resolume, which is a VJing, layering, effect composite engine that Luis can then use together with the music and make a really, really cool experience. We have other softwares as well that can run, but those are our main softwares. So things are... except we only have 2 staff, right? It's dozens of millions that is popped down, the usual story, great architecture, and then now we have to run the thing. And that's the phase we're in now. So that's why I'm here, just escaping. We get $250,000 from ESO per year, and that's kind of the, in order not to close telescopes at La Silla or whatever, that's what we have to deal with. Pretty much that pays for 2 staff and a bit more. But we have very reduced hours, so we don't open Monday, Tuesday. It's one way to do it. Other ways to do it is, of course, that we planned quite well in advance over those 5 years. We really did lots of work in the first few years. We have a great team, good documentation. We didn't have to start up a lot of things from new, meaning the visual identity isn't new, it's an expansion of the ESO visual identity. Our web system is what we have used for ESO and for the Hubble Space Telescope, meaning our booking system is an expansion. Like we have the shop module already, we could do an expansion. Of course, it's extra work, but it's not starting from scratch. Same with the audiovisuals. We did HD back in the days, and then UHD, and then we could expand to full dome in 2013. So this is kind of what has kept us alive. And for those who are interested in money, this is pretty much the gory detail. It's the 2019 budget, because 18 is a bit special, everything is free. But in 19 and onwards, we're going to charge ticket fees, like $5-6 or euros per ticket, and get some ticket income. But we still rely a little bit on donations on spot and partnerships with institutes. But by and large, it's going to work out. And this is the way we do with the staffing. 2 real staff, the bold ones, and then we have contractor receptionists, we have volunteer guides, we have a little bit of ESO time from people, also of course from the department, like my time or Luis's time, which we don't count against those $250,000 from ESO. So it's a bit of a hodgepodge or a patchwork operation, but all in all, we have about 10 full-time equivalents to run the facility, and that's the full story. Thanks.
Well, the one question I see on Slack is that this will be a wonderful place to host the next AstroVis workshop. So think about that.
with all the stuff we have, right?
All right. So Ryan White will tell us about AstroVis at the Morrison Planetarium.
As soon as my PowerPoint actually opens. So a little bit like Lars, I'm kind of wondering why I said I'd give this talk. But the motivation was in part because as we had conversations with the science organizing committee, the question kind of kept coming up like, well, how do planetariums actually use these visualizations? What are the use cases for what's being created? So that was the motivation for this, which feels a little less interesting than sonification of cool star data. But California Academy of Sciences is a large natural history museum that also is focused on life sciences, but also has a planetarium, Morrison Planetarium, 290-seat theater, 30-degree tilt. And this is kind of the, as you might imagine, the focus of a lot of our astronomy visualization. But, for example, our most recent planetarium show, we make a lot of our own planetarium shows, is actually about coral reefs. So, in fact, we integrate the astronomy story into a lot of broader natural history stories. So what I'm kind of focusing on is sort of the different ways that we that astronomy visualizations appear throughout the institution. One of those is, as I said, we produce our show. So in 2016, we produced a show called Incoming, Asteroids, Comets, and the Hard-Hitting Stories of Our Cosmic Origins. And for that show, we created what I used as my badge image, this visualization of the changing orbits of the outer planets and how that scattered objects out of the early solar system. So we're seeing, fast-forwarded here, several million years of the early history of the solar system, and showing as the planets migrate, scattering smaller objects out of the solar system, which leads to the current distribution of Kuiper belt objects and such, which is a message from the show. This is a visualization that probably took about 3 person months, or maybe 4, to create. It's integrated into a fully rendered story that is a 25-minute journey from Meteor Crater out through the solar system, and narrated by George Takei, an investment of, give or take, about $1 million to create this entire show. So that's one way that we use astronomy visualization. But in the Planetarium Dome, we also do a lot of live programming, for example, lectures. So this image is actually from a snapshot from our real-time software. We're having a lecture talking about METI, the messaging of extraterrestrial intelligence. And so this, anyone actually even want to take a stab at what this is? Does that distribution look at all familiar to people? Correct, pulsars. So these are the pulsars that appear on the Pioneer plaque. And so we redid this in 3D and allowed people to kind of see this in context. So we create visualizations for our lecture series. We have live programming. This one I actually have to credit Mark Subarow. This was one that actually had people guess on Facebook. It was for our More Than Planetarium page. These are actually reconstructed orbits of globular clusters around the galactic center based on Gaia data that Mark Subarow did. We did a collaborative, we're now doing a monthly collaborative program between Adler and the Academy. It's a universe update program that we've been doing for 10 years at the Academy. We're now linking the 2 planetariums, and you'll hear more about that from Mark, to be able to create a collaborative program. But we do this once a month, and this is for our adult cocktails and science kind of program in the planetarium. We also do school shows and things like that, of course, and actually are working on how to create greater opportunities for interactivity in the dome, even though we have 290 seats. So it's something I'd love to talk to more expert people in the room about. And then we have different venues throughout the institution. So this is the queuing area for the planetarium called Hoffeld Hall, named after the donor, who actually didn't get much money, but has a lot of lawyers in the family. So Hoffeld Hall is a wonderfully intimate space. You can have a great presentation for about up to about 70 or 80 people. This allows you to have conversations. So basically, after a planetarium show starts in the planetarium, 10 minutes later, we go into the we open up the Hoffeld Hall to be able to have these more intimate, data-driven stories on this kind of wall. It's about basically a 5K by 2K display. We also have a 3D theater, which we've basically given up running 3D films in for various reasons, which I can talk about. It has to do with kind of the business sheet that Lars presented. Right now, we're doing a live 3D tour of the universe. As I mentioned, we're doing coral reefs, like corals, all the time in the planetarium. People who want astronomy are directed to the 3D theater, where they have a live presenter giving them a half-hour tour of the universe from Earth out to the cosmic right background in 3D, which the poster is vaguely supposed to suggest, except that our graphics department hates 3D things. So it was like, how can you minimally recommend or suggest the idea of 3D? And this is as far as they could possibly go. We also have a great little presentation space. These are actually just 4 HD monitors pushed together. And during the day, these are actually separated into a little checkerboard pattern. But for live presentations, we push them together. And we do, in this case, this is actually the day of the TRAPPIST-1 announcement. And this is our senior presenter, Josh Roberts, doing a presentation about the discovery. And so we're able to immediately kind of address some of these topics. And this is a very intimate space, like probably 20 or 30 people on a little set of risers talking in the planetarium, in the exhibit space. And then we want to leverage any of this work that we do, whether it's to create visuals in support of these programs or to create visuals in support of our lecture series, or to get more mileage out of the content we create for our planetarium shows. This is, for example, our educators page. So we create snippets of the videos and educational resources for educators to use. We also have what we call a universe update of the web page, which is basically stories written by staff and often accompanied by videos, in this case, showing the Cassini trajectory around Saturn over its entire duration of its mission. We have, of course, a Facebook page, and the videos here, for example, looking at the future target of New Horizons is another way that we take. This was actually a video that we created for a program, and we then leverage that for the for Facebook. And then, of course, when we can create VR experiences, as I said, we took the sequences from incoming and created short 360 video sequences that we pushed out through Facebook and YouTube and the usual channels of radio back when it existed. And so that's another way that we just try to get as much mileage as possible out of our content. So I just wanted to offer that up as a set of kind of ideas and ways that we implement astronomy visualization throughout the institution. As an example of things that we might want to talk about is we tend to create our own stuff, but how as a community we can support institutions to do these kind of programs for smaller places. So that's my.
What interactivity have you already tried, if anything, you're doing?
So, so most of what we've done for our school shows is kind of a pair and share approach. So we'll go through and then just inviting kids to point, look around. So because it's 290 seats, we can't really have a lot of interaction between the instructor and the students. So it's really kind of just trying to get them to engage with their neighbor or to physically do something.
So no like clickers or anything like that?
No.
Here's one question. On Slack.
Oh, yes, right. So Pulsar 3D map, is that available online?
It is available for UniView users. It was developed in UniView, and it is in the UniView user group library. Jackie, again.
I'm curious about the Morrison-Adler happy relationship you guys have with dome casting. You're probably going to talk about this part. But I just, maybe a word as to, are others invited, or maybe you're going to mention that, why did you guys get started together?
Others aren't disinvited. I think what happened was that we both have Thursday night programs, and a 6:30 time slot, which is where we always do this program, worked for Adler as an 8:30 program. And we would actually collaborated on some data exchange and also for the Kavli lecture series, which we'll probably talk about later. So it just was a kind of natural thing. I think that one of the things that I find really interesting about it, and the great experiment right now, is that we're co-presenting. So in the two that we've done so far, Mark and I have traded off presenting, and it's kind of interesting to be able to have kind of a dialogue in the theater. And so it's kind of really, I think, in very early experimental stages in that way. So I don't know.
Yeah, well, I'll talk about that. But yes, I certainly might hope that as this thing grows, we can maybe engage more partners and stream it out to the rest of the world as well. But it's
Cool.
been a fun experiment. Which is my last slide. It's just totally ruined now. The next speaker will be me. Oh, thank you. Hold on. Thanks, Ryan. And let's see, where's my talk? I totally can't find my talk. Oh, there it is. I should have put my name on it. All right, so yeah, I'm going to talk about dome casting. And this is a technology that's been around in the planetarium community for a while now, a solid decade since it was first demonstrated. There's support for it in at least 3 of the major software packages that are used in the planetarium community. That's UniView, it's Digistar, and OpenSpace. But it hasn't been used a lot. But one of the things we've been really pushing on at the Adler is really trying to build up the community for this technology. And the reason is a lot of the same reasons that we're here together is that there's incredible potential there to take place as well. If I look at the planetarium community, there are places like the Morrison planetarium that can make the kind of things you saw. They're resource-rich places, but there are a lot of small places who may have lost their facility in a flood. You know, one person's running them, and try to distribute that throughout the world. The signature program that we've been doing Domecasting in is something called the Kavli Lecture. So thanks to the Kavli Foundation, we're able to put on 2 of these a year and actually spend a lot of time working with a scientist, making custom visualizations about their particular science. So by custom, I mean things like, for example, we did one with Mike Turner, and I was inspired by the cosmologist Mike Turner at University of Chicago. As a graduate student, I remember seeing his talk, and I think it really got, because talks back then were terrible, colloquial, right? It was all these scribbly black view graphs, and they'd smear on them when they'd write on them, and you had to watch this, and he had color and drew things that were fun, and and I think that's probably why I sort of went on this career path into visualization. So this was one of his sort of famous ones that shows the history of the universe, and he called it the Yellow Brick Road, because it was kind of like going down the Yellow Brick Road. So we brought that into 3D, and we made it.
Yellow Brick Road.
Oh, I didn't know I had audio.
Go down that yellow brick road and watch the universe evolve, and we'll start with the quark soup. Oh, look at that. Look at those quarks. See those little cues? So we got the quark soup. That's how the universe was when it began. It was really, really hot.
All right, so that's a little bit of that. So this is for, we're growing that network, slowly trying to build a group of planetariums to participate. We do these lectures twice a year. The last one, we had 17 sites scattered around the world, but we're really hoping we can grow this much more. One of those sites was Bogota, Colombia, and the interesting thing about that site is that they were providing simultaneous translation. Thank you. And one thing that we are hoping to do as well is not just stream, when we have these partners do translations, have them stream the translation as well. So we can crowdsource simultaneous translation in many different languages. And that's one way, I think, to really make this grow. I think, this is a visualization created for a gravitational wave lecture. It's kind of trippy in the planetarium. But I'm really just showing this as a placeholder, and also the Yellow Brick Road. This is in the 360 format. One of the things we're doing is not just synchronizing these planetariums, but we're streaming video to YouTube 360. That video can now be streamed at 4K resolution. Hopefully that'll get higher, which is pretty decent. That allows us to reach an audience as well that's not able to make it in the planetarium. So in our last lecture, we had a group at the Chicago Children's Hospital, and 35 high school age children were able to watch the climate change lecture from their hospital beds. Also a group in a bar who apparently couldn't be bothered to come into the planetarium in Chicago. This is a museum in New Zealand as well, so places that didn't have the technology to participate in the Domecast could join as well. How am I doing on time? 2 minutes. Here's a little promotional video.
My name is Lisa Kaltenegger. I'm the director of the Carl Sagan Institute at Cornell.
Let's see some of the cool
and
stuff.
The question if any of these worlds actually have life
Maybe
I've done before. What I love about the Kavli Foundation Planetarium show is that it gives you time to interact with visual artists that provide these graphics in this immersive planetarium environment. And as a scientist, you get to tweak to make it the most realistic. And I personally...
All right. We talked a little bit about this collaboration with the California Academy of Sciences. This has me really excited. Some of the differences is that we're doing this every month, and in many cases we're trying to do it about the latest science that happened that month. So we're spending a couple days right beforehand we're going through the archives, we're going through things like AAS Nova and Astrobytes, finding the latest science and trying to visualize in real time. So this is some of the Slack conversation about what's going on where we're trading visuals back and forth and making comments. But that level of collaboration, I think, is a direction forward for this community. And one thing to think about as we need to come up with ideas for unconference sessions and how we can collaborate in hopefully new ways. And that's the end of my talk. But let me see if I have any questions on Slack. But I think we can actually segue, if there are questions, but segue into the more discussion section. And Ryan's going to help me to navigate that.
There actually was a question about dome casting with WWT.
Yes.
Is there any possibility of that happening?
There's technology internally to do it, but we've never really set up a model. I have to say that one of the changes that happened, there's a lot of focus on Planetarium and Microsoft research, and the AAS isn't really a planetarium organization, while a lot of Planetarium have AAS members. A lot of the focus has been over the last couple of years in AAS to get the web-based stuff going and have that feature parity so that everybody can get to it. And probably after that, sort of doing more work on the planetarium side, data and casting and stuff might be sort of in the future. But we'll see if we can cooperate more with IPS on that one.
Yep. Yeah, that would be great. I'd like to see it. Basically, it always seems to me that the way that Worldwide Telescope works would be very natural for it.
Yeah, it's partly if a hero wanted to step up with Planetarium and work on just routing the WWT's already existing protocols between Planetarium. Right now, you can run WWT from one console and have all the projectors fly. All you need to really do is remote that data stream to the other planetariums, and then they can just act as slaves just to say that moment, so you get full synchronization.
Yeah, we should do that.
Casting versus dome slavery, though, it doesn't have
Nick, if you want it in 8K, I'll make it for you in 8K. I'd love it. All right, no problem. All right. So.
Oh, right.
Travis, you had a question that you want to pose to the planetarium community.
Sure.
Would you like to go?
So I apologize, I misunderstood a bit the format of how this roundtable discussion is going to be. So I didn't prepare a presentation, but Morris wanted to bring up something for discussion, and that is, so a little bit of background. So I teach at University of Alaska, and we were lucky to build a planetarium 10 years ago. And we designed the planetarium to be a lecture hall as well. So we're fortunate that we can teach every astronomy class in the planetarium, which is a bit unusual. Most astronomy classes are taught in the lecture hall, and they maybe visit the planetarium once or twice a semester. So we have every class in the planetarium, and our goal is just to use the planetarium, the full dome environment, in a meaningful way for every subject. And we've been doing this for 10 years now, and we have some good evidence that it's helping a lot. So just as an example, one of the things we've done the last few years is we've used a tool called the Astronomy Diagnostic Test, or ADT, which has 25 questions about astronomy topics that are usually taught. And fortunately for us, for our solar system astronomy class, the questions can be basically divided into three categories. Topics that we teach using the full dome technology, topics we teach but don't use the full dome technology, and topics we don't teach at all. And if we look at the pre-test we give students at the start of the semester before we've done anything at all, they all score about 30% in all three categories, which is just slightly better than random guessing. And then after the semester's over, in the post-testing, we find for topics that we don't teach at all, there's no change, which is a good sign, meaning our tool is telling us something. For topics that don't use the full dome, they go from about 30% up to about 50%, which is a little depressing, actually, in a sort of a way. But for the topics that do use the full dome, they go up to about 80%. So that's pretty cool. That's a good sign. However, I should point out, for topics that you do use the full dome, we spent a lot of time on it. I spent 3 full 75-minute classes on phases of the moon. If you don't know phases of the moon by the end of that, then you deserve to fail. You deserve much worse than that. Now, but one of the things, but that's not what I'm here to talk about. So I'm not here to tout my successes. One of the things I want to talk about is that in that last 10 years, I've noticed there are misconceptions that are popping up that I did not see before when I was not teaching in the planetarium. And I'll give you an example. So when we talk about motion of inferior planets, like Venus, we have a planetarium script set up where we turn off diurnal motion, so the Earth is not rotating, and we set it up so that the sun is just always below the horizon right before sunrise. And then we step through several months and we watch the motion of Venus as it rises in the east, in the eastern sky, crosses over, and then goes back down. So that's over the span of about 3 or 4 months. And then we fast forward about a month or so, and we do the same thing in the western sky. So they can see the complex pattern that Venus takes as it goes through the morning and evening skies. And we do that a couple times so they can see the pattern is slightly different between each one. But now here's the thing that I do. I ask my students a concept test question where I say, when Venus is in the evening sky, when it's the evening star, where does it rise? And what do you think 90% of the students say? West. In the west. Is that right? No, that's not right. So we're causing a problem here. So one of the problems is with the planetarium, we can do all sorts of things that are not realistic, right? We can speed time up, we can travel at speeds faster than the speed of light, and we can cause all sorts of things. So no matter how much time you spend saying, this isn't real, you'll never see this. If you ask them, what's real? Like, well, the thing you showed us, right? So if you do things like speed up the motion where you can see Mars moving through the sky, you may be introducing a misconception that you could go out late at night and you could actually see a planet moving through the sky. So the discussion I wanted to bring up was just as, first of all, to be aware of this issue, because I didn't really think about it. When I got our planetarium, it was like, hot dog, we're going to just make things better. And I think in most ways we are, but you can do damage. And so I wanted to bring that up as something to think about when you are creating planetarium content. And as I talked about in my earlier talk, I spent a lot of time thinking about misconceptions and where we may be misleading people. So thinking about that in your own work as far as how a visualization could be interpreted or misinterpreted, and talking with your audience about what are they coming in with when, what's in their mindset when they see when you're showing on the dome. I think I talked for 5 whole minutes there anyway, which is not my intent, but that's how it worked out. So can anyone think of any examples of things they've done in the full dome that they look back at in hindsight and say, maybe that wasn't such a good idea? Yes.
I actually sort of have a partial solution to that Venus panels thing, which is what we do is we yaw the dome to put Venus straight in front of us. And so that way it puts them in like a totally different mode than thinking east to west, that if you put west right in front of you, it's all of a sudden, it's a different part of the way they conceive of it. So they still learn the sort of the way it goes through its cycles, but it's not thinking about it from left to right like they've done through all the other days they've been in the planetarium. It's just a little bit different.
Oh, yes,
The
sir.
other thing you can do is pitch them all the way back to sunrise, or apparent sunrise, and have the two of them cross the sky together. So the Venus and the sun both appear to rise in the east and then set in the west.
That's actually what I do to debrogram, because after they all answer that it rises west, I say, let's see if you're right. Turn on diurnal motion, and they're like, oh yeah, duh. So, yes, sir.
So one of the other misconceptions has been looking at the Sloan Digital Sky Survey data set to look at the large-scale structure.
I know exactly what you're going to say.
Right? And they were going to go, oh, the large-scale structure of the universe is an hourglass.
Yeah.
So I learned to talk through that. Why is it shaped like that? Because look, zoom out from the Milky Way and see how the Milky Way is bisecting that hourglass. Then looking at the dark clouds that the clouds of dust that block that say it's not productive to look outside the galaxy through all this dust. So we look out the thin top and bottom, or start at right where we're looking from Earth out this way, and that's why this is an artifact, but what you're seeing, the shape that we're seeing is sort of the cosmic bubbles, you know. And so they're sort of nipping that in the bud before you get to that misconception.
That's a perfect example. The one thing I'll mention is I've done almost exactly what you've done, just pointing this out. This is why we only looked in these parts directions. Then, since the Sloan survey area is not identical, both areas, they think there's more galaxies in this direction than in the other. So one of the challenges is you can lead them through the process verbally, but what you see, as we all know, that's why we're here, right, is a powerful effect, and so it can be very hard to combat that. Yes, sir.
I have a question for Mark. So. I'm curious how much.
It's a round table. You talk about it.
I'm curious how much work it is to set up a Domecast, both for you, of course, but also for those receiving it.
It's not. Well, it depends about the creation of content, right? And so part of why I was saying I like this experiment is we got from like making everything completely original to like, you know, making things faster. But you don't have to do that. So setting it up is pretty simple. You distribute, the idea is that you're not distributing all the pixels, you're just distributing configuration information. So if there's data associated with, if there's code, like custom code, you distribute that as a package, everybody downloads it, but then you just connect and you register it. It works. It's pretty stable. That was not always the case when we started doing the series, but it's gotten much more stable.
But it's still like several months of work for someone on your side setting up a talk like the one to.
The Kavli lectures we spent several months. You know, the universe update we're doing in a week or so.
And then the follow-up question is: do you ever get sort of a bit saddened by the fact that it's just a one-off event? Okay, you reach a lot of planetariums, but is there no way to keep that Turner thing, for instance, which looks amazing? I also love these drawings. And
I do get sad that it's a one-off event. One of the nice things that streaming to 360 did is we get a recording of that as well. So we have that as a record, a full recording.
Mark, I just wanted to point out that in that particular Kavli Turner election was that you had like 15, right? 15 nodes.
Yeah, roughly, yeah.
Yeah, and we were one. And you did a lot of work in helping us set up for that, and you had to do that for everybody. So that was pretty amazing.
It is a little crazy when I'm like, you know, rebooting into the computer and Donna like a few minutes beforehand. That last week's a little sick.
Also, our museum said we will not have a lecture or the person's not there. So we were creative, really describe it properly. We sold out. You know, people came expecting where's Turner. So we at least showed him there in Chicago, but people weren't annoyed. They loved it. But we
right. You have to convince your museum that if you're going to push out this content, you need to take it as well. So that's
exactly.
That's
no. I'm on your side.
Yep.
But I'll just point out this: the spherical planet is a problem because like the time zone for their Kavli lectures usually doesn't work for us for a public talk. I mean, we've lucked into this 6:30, 8:30 thing, which works for both of us, but that is one of the challenges.
Yeah, one thing I didn't mention, we actually do this lecture twice, so we can hit different time zones. We make it to the point where, you know, if we try to get Asian, we do it 3 times, like 6 hours apart or something. But yeah, that's.
We've had poor attendance at the Alaska ones because it starts at like 4 p.m., which is terrible for everybody. No, because it's too late for students, too early for.
Do you get similar poor attendance for the individuals? Because like for our public lecture series, I get people from all across the globe, India, where it's places where it's 3 in the morning, etc. So the people using the individual stuff, are you able to track that around the globe?
We've not.
It's just
I
crazy.
don't know if we have. We haven't done a great job of promoting the sort of individual use of it. We've been mostly doing sort of VR parties where we will ship a location, a bunch of classes, and so we can track that. But I think we're not promoting it that much on the website.
So we have time for a couple more questions before we have our second keynote speaker come in and set up. I noticed that people need to get up and stretch or go to the restroom. So what we'll do is we'll take the last couple of questions, and then while we're setting up, people can go and stretch, but please be back quickly. It's not a full break. So yeah,
I have a quick one, and it's, I love the idea of this, maybe it's an extension of Lars' question, but I'm kind of wondering, like, how do the communities end up feeling, can you do more to get the communities interacting with each other? The idea of like the Ghana school kids, or the Ghana, and not just Ghana, Tokyo, Chicago to San Francisco to New York, it feels like it's too one-off. I wish there was more interaction between maybe our education departments to build upon the interaction for more cross-education programs that we could talk about or move forward on. So I'm kind of just throwing that out there as an idea, as something we can discuss.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's well, we do have an unconference session.
Yeah.
Like one thing when we were envisioning this, we were really worried about the fact that the speaker isn't there. And one thing we sort of had a template for is locations to invite their local astronomical community, some of those experts, to speak with a little reception before or afterwards. Now, not every place has this problem.
Okay, this was from Travis. Going back to your ADP results, have you ever published those?
We're working on it.
Good.